You're listening to The John Hammer Show, thoughts and discussions from a preacher, disciple of Jesus, author, poet, and pastor. Brought to you by the Sunrise Podcast Network. For more information about Sunrise and or the Sunrise Podcast Network, check out isunrise.org. This podcast is also sponsored in part by Seattle Bible College. For more information about the school, check out seattlebiblecollege.edu.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in today to the Dear Young Man series on the John Hammer Show. And I've got a friend and guest, Nate Drahota here. And so you wanted to say hi to everybody, Nate? And
hey, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a talk with you today. And this is a whole new kind of venture in something that I wanted to do when I started my podcast, but I didn't quite get around to this series of episodes yet. But so it's kind of fleshing out as it goes, kind of a journey I'm taking people on. But why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself first, and about your life, where you're at, and where you come from a little bit.
Yeah. So I, born and raised in Minnesota. I was there till I was 18 years old, and I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school. I took the summer off and joined the military.
Wow.
So that was taken after my father, who had joined the Marine Corps as well. I went out to San Diego, did boot camp, did all the training and whatnot, and spent 5 years in the military. Did a lot of interesting things, went to the desert a couple times. But so that was a big, I guess, formative time of my life. I actually ended up, I think we'll talk about it a little bit here, but grappling and stuff. I ended up starting grappling in Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
I had a friend who was he was a blue belt in Jiu Jitsu, and he was like, oh, let's grapple when we had off time. So we'd work out and we'd just grapple. And
right on.
I was terrible, but it was all right because we were learning basic things. And then from there I got out of the military, and when I got out, my parents had moved to Washington. My mom had come here to pursue a job. And so it was either go back to Minnesota, where just my family was all gone, my sisters had moved away, my parents had moved away, or come out to Washington and go to school, use the GI Bill, which is what I did. Came out and went to UW and got a degree in business, and I'm working in financial analysis. I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I've been training since I moved out here in 2011, so almost 10 years.
Okay.
So I got the black belt in I think it was January, so it's been 6 months.
Congratulations on that too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's crazy. It's been 6 months already. It doesn't feel like it. It feels like barely got it. But
and thank you for your service too.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And then you also are married.
Yes, I'm married, and my wife Elizabeth, who works at the Sunrise, graphic designer, and our little boy Theodore, who's turning 2 in August. So that's exciting, and we're expecting another in a couple of months here in October. So
that's pretty awesome.
Family growing.
So 2 kids almost. One that you do have 2, but just one's not birthed yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And your wife's been a real blessing to the church and the team and everything. So it's been cool to get to know you a little bit and have you on. And some of these things I haven't got to talk to you about that much, but we're just going to get to go more in depth, I guess, today and have other people listening in on the convo. So that's really cool. So when you went into the military, was that kind of a life aspiration? Ever since you were a little boy, you're like, my dad served, I want to be in the military one day? Or
no, not really. Actually, my dad didn't really ever talk about being in the military. I didn't really know very much about it until I got a little older. Went to in high school, they had the recruiters did their whole thing. I don't know if they still even do that anymore, but the recruiters came to the high school, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. The Marines are the best of the best. I wonder if I could ever possibly do that. I didn't think very highly of myself at the time, so I thought that was kind of oh, maybe I should do something else, like the Coast Guard or some other branch of service or something. And well, my dad was a Marine. Maybe I could do it. So I tried it out, and I think it was a really good decision. I mean, I didn't enjoy my entire 5 years. I will say that there were moments that was some of the worst moments of my life, and but I also had some really great moments and great experience. So it's kind of I wouldn't take it back for sure.
Right. Yeah. Wow. So you, I think I was listening to another podcast with Jocko or somebody, and they were talking about Marines, and just because he wasn't a Marine, but they were talking about how great Marines are. They're for whatever reason, it seems like every single Marine that you meet is just on their game. And they're even in our other special forces, branches, they're there's a pendulum between guys that are really in it, really serious, are doing incredible. And you've got, they're good enough to make it, but they're He goes, but it seemed like every Marine that ever worked with us, like they did the harder work than we did, and they all had like a really high level of excellence. They're like, there's something about that training.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's it's like anything. It's a microcosm of society. There are some good Marines and there are some really bad Marines, and we had names for them. But there's good and bad everywhere, and I think the Marine Corps has specifically like the esprit de corps is what they call it. It's like your pride in being a Marine, and that you are a rifleman and you're this, like they really pump you up. So I think that there's a huge amount of pride in that service that a lot of the other branches don't seem to have quite the same level of. And there's the inter-service rivalry where they make fun of Navy people and they make fun of us, and Army people make fun of us, and so on and so forth. But I don't think that, at least in my experience, people from the other branches are quite as prideful as Marines are about being Marines.
Gotcha.
So,
was boot camp brutal?
Yeah, or it's funny. It wasn't as bad as I kind of thought it would be. It's like anything else you go through. It's like it's built up to be this great terrible thing. And it's funny, when I got recruited, the thing that I was most worried about was boot camp. Yeah. When I realized the thing that was actually the worst was when you go to the fleet. The Fleet Marine Forces, after you get out of boot camp, and you're like, oh no, I've signed up for 5 years of I'm going to be told what to do and treated like a child for the next 5 years. There's nothing I can do about it. Like boot camp itself is like, oh, it's 3 months, it's not so bad. Yeah. But I mean, it's more, I think, psychological than it was physical. I think most anybody that's like 18 to in their 20s can get through the physical aspect of boot camp. It's more, they really break you down.
Was there, you said like they hype you up a lot, like you're a Marine, but do they break you down in a sense before they hype you up?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the whole, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of in-depth psychological study that's gone on and how you're supposed to break down people and build them up. And boot camp is very structured and organized, I think, to do exactly that. Yeah. Like the first few weeks, you're the first week you're there, you're awake 72 hours straight, getting all your immunizations and doing all your records and doing whatever, and then they take advantage of your fragility at that moment, and they start screaming at you and going crazy, and you're like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? Yeah. And then they very derogatory, saying bad things about you, and then you kind of are like, oh man, I can't do anything right. And they specifically try to make you think you can't do anything right. They set the bar or the expectations so high that it's impossible to do these things in the time frame they give you, and so it's just constantly failure, and they slowly start moving that bar a little bit. I mean, I think you start reaching up to that higher bar they've set to some extent, but they also start moving it to try and give you some more positive reinforcement instead of all the negative. Yeah. And so, the first, they have phases when I was in. I'm sure they still do. But it was the first phase was just this is terrible. You're being treated terribly, like garbage all the time. You're getting, PT on the quarterdeck and getting yelled at and screamed at. Have to exercise and do other things. They take you to the pit, which is the sand pits out there, and they have you do all your PT and everything, and so you're working out super hard. And then the second phase, it starts getting a little bit more oh, I'm actually doing stuff. That's more like the field stuff you're doing. So you'd go to Camp Pendleton and you do a little bit more field work. So you're out doing land navigation and obstacle courses and things that are a little bit more fun, I guess. What people would think is fun. I don't think it's fun anymore. But when you're a kid, you're like, oh, that looks like that'd be fun. It's you're shooting guns and you're doing all the fun stuff. And so you get a little bit more positive there. And then by third phase, at the end, you do the Reaper and the Crucible in second phase. And after that, it's suddenly you're a little bit more respected, and you're a third phase recruit now. So all the other recruits are like, oh no, it's third phase guys. Okay. It's so funny, the pecking orders you create anywhere you go. It's we're all still I've been in the Marine Corps a month longer than this other person, and I'm this superior being. It's so funny to look back on it, and it's that's not really that big of a deal, but it was in people's minds.
I've thought a lot about hierarchies lately, and just like in the military, obviously you see it, but like you said, it's not even just the official ranks. It's even like you said.
Well, when we were junior enlisted, there's private first class, and then lance corporal. Yeah. Right. But there's senior lance corporals, quote unquote, right? That are these people that have been lance corporals for longer. Yeah. But they're still not really your boss, but they kind of are, because they still tell you what to do. And there's these hierarchies within hierarchies that are created. But the military is very hierarchical. Yeah. Anybody's your boss. Anybody that outranks you is your boss. Yeah. If they tell you to do something, you absolutely have to do it. Yeah. So it's not the real world, right? It's people can't tell me what to do out here.
Was that completely shocking, or were you, you kind of go into it knowing that?
Kind of. I mean,
were you a rebellious kid or like somebody that bucked the system, or not really? Or
not really.
Yeah,
like
so-
I kind of went along. Go along to get along.
yeah, so you're respectful of authority in a general sense, at least.
Yeah,
And-
it's for the most part. I think
Yeah.
it's more of like a gray man mentality, where
Okay.
like, oh, if I'm kind of the person nobody notices.
Yeah.
Then I can kind of I'll just fly under the radar and
Gotcha.
kind of get the stuff done, and yeah.
What made you think that you wouldn't be able to do it? Like.
I mean, I wasn't. I'd like to think of myself as a little bit of a late bloomer. Like, I think I wasn't like particularly athletic. I didn't do a lot of sports in high school. I mean, I played sports as a kid growing up, but I wasn't. I didn't excel in anything very much.
Gotcha.
And so it's kind of could I do that? Could I be this awesome? The Marines portrayed in movies, or just going out there and going crazy on people. And they're like, I don't know if I could actually do that. And then, like I said, you go in there and you're like, oh, it's not what everyone built it up to be.
Right. Do you feel like your self-image changed quite a bit through that process, though, of boot camp and then like even just being enlisted?
Yeah, I
in the
think
military?
so. I think so. I think.
Did it help you? You said at times there was the worst moments of your life and also your best. But do you, like, as far as, do you feel like you went in as a boy and came out as a man kind of thing, or was it not that dramatic?
Yeah, I think I probably did. I think it wasn't like a moment, right? But once I was out, I was definitely a different person, a much different person than I was when I went in. And I think it's like the collection of moments, and then like the friends you make and the connections you make. I think like going through shared strife with people is like the best way to like get close to other people.
Right.
I still have some friends from the Marine Corps that we try to get together once a year, and they're all around the country.
Right.
But like I think like I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of it, with the book Wild at Heart.
Yep.
Where John Eldredge, I think he talks about that like in order to like for masculinity to be like confirmed has to be done through masculinity, right?
Yep.
Or I'm saying that wrong, but like essentially that like these like men that I looked up to, these men in positions of authority started respecting me as I went through the ranks and started like accomplishing things and whatnot. And that's like that reinforcement, I think, made me feel like I was better at things and I could succeed and I could do well. It's like, oh, these guys like who were like some of the toughest, best men I've ever met thought I was good at my job. So who cares what anybody else thinks? Like I'm good at what I do. Like I could do whatever I want. And so I think that gives some confidence that wasn't there before.
I really like John Eldredge and appreciate a lot of his work. I haven't read some of his more recent stuff, but I've kind of had an itch. I started watching some of his podcasts or some places where he was interviewed more recently.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated Wild at Heart and his Waking the Dead book. And and I've kind of always been fascinated by that narrative of like boyhood to manhood and fathers and sons and a lot of the themes that he talks about. And I think the military is one of those few places, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, is because it seems like it's one of the few places where we still have a rite of passage, if you will. There's a boot camp. You make it or you don't. You like you said, you get affirmed by people that are older, more mature, more experienced that you look up to. I think is a movement in the church of like people restoring like a rite of passage for their sons, like in the home and through some form of like mentoring, giving them specific challenges even. And I'm looking into some of that because my boy's about to be 13 next year. He turns 13. And so I think that's really powerful, and even in just the whole like the whole concept of honor, like one of the few, like if I'm at a funeral of somebody that I don't even know really, but they do like the military salute and they have like maybe somebody that even fires the
21 gun
gun salute thing, and if they do something like that, then like I'm in tears, because there's like almost nowhere where we really have like significant honor left, and that felt to me like I was like, why am I so like moved by this? And it's like it's just like honor, sacrifice, bravery, living for something bigger than yourself. I feel like that's kind of lost in a lot of other places. Yeah. So
I think in society, like a lot of like traditions are kind of scoffed at. It's not important. I remember when I was in, and I had a gunnery sergeant who he was an interesting person. I had mixed opinions about him in general, but he did say a few things that I thought were very wise. And he'd said that like we are the keepers of traditions, right? And like if we're not keeping them, if we don't make them sacred and like make them valuable, then they just go away. Yeah. Right. And like the Marine Corps is like steeped in tradition. The military in general is steeped in tradition. Right. Like it's just like like it's very important that we do things exactly the way that they've been done, and like obviously things change as we go through,
Right.
like through history and society changes, but like there's a lot of traditional things that are just very, very respected there that the rest of society doesn't seem to do, and that is an interesting transition when you get out of the military,
Right.
and just that, like you have a certain level of respect that you get when you're like at a certain rank or you've accomplished a certain amount in the military, and when you get out, there's no framework for that, right?
Right.
There's no it's like you're just like, oh, I remember it was funny, I got out and I was going to school, and while I was going to school I worked at a Gold's Gym just in the front desk or whatever, like just was like make a little bit of money, just to have some extra spending money, and like I just was thinking like I was in charge of like convoys with millions and millions of dollars of government equipment just like a year ago, and now I'm like folding towels at this Gold's Gym, and like it's just like, man, it's crazy. That transition I think is really hard for a lot of people.
Was it hard for you?
I don't think it was that hard for me actually.
Yeah.
I think I did pretty well with it.
Yeah, but I could imagine. I was even going to ask you that kind of question today. Like, it's interesting you bring it up, because I was like, to be in such a clear hierarchy, like how, like you pretty much need to, right? If I understand it right, you pretty much need to please your officer that's in charge of promoting you, and you have a very clearly defined role.
Yeah.
And if you do that well, if you're up for promotion, and then like you're in that kind of system, and then now all of a sudden you're out in civilian land, and it's not that clear cut, like this is what's in front of you.
Yeah, it's like it's a different game, right? Like the Marine Corps, like the military has a very specific game, right?
Yeah.
Like you get your rifle score, your PT score, or your other, like your time and grade score or whatever. Like all these scores help you achieve this promotion, right? And so you're like, oh, I know what I have to be good at. I know what I have to improve in. I know where to put my effort. And when you get out, you have to kind of reorient and figure out the game that you're in now, right? So it's like, oh, I'm in college. Oh, okay, I get a syllabus at the beginning of the semester, and they expect this, and this is what they want. I do my first paper, and I kind of get an idea of like, oh, this is what they're after.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, college is the same, right? Right. And I thought, I mean, I don't know if that could be like too egotistical or something, but like college wasn't very hard after getting out of the military. Because it's just like, oh, these are the expectations. The professor tells you exactly what they want. Yeah. If you just do that, like, you do really well.
Right.
And so like that's just kind of how I've gone through. Let's go. What are the expectations? How do I try to achieve them? And then like go forward from there. So
did you have to experience much dealing with like when you were in the military and getting out? Like, was there stigma of like, because I mean, it seems like even in the last few years, like even if you like wear an American flag T-shirt, like some people are going to be like, you're racist or you're an imperialist or you're, and it's like, well, not really. You know what I mean? Like it seems, I don't know. It seems like that it's got to have some effect on the mental health of soldiers to see like how people perceive them or the military or whether we should be at war or not. Did you deal with any of that kind of? I
think actually that wasn't too big of an impact on me, thankfully. Like I think people in general are very supportive of the military and like enlisted and officers. Like I didn't really hear anybody say anything too derogatory about it. I mean, other than I think people tend to think enlisted military people are stupid, or like not as educated, or not like. I mean, I've seen things, and people have said things in the past of like, oh, this person, you're not smart enough to go to college, or you weren't smart enough to do this or that, and it's like, no, that's not really true. Yeah. I mean, there's stupid people everywhere, right? Or people less intelligent that go into every aspect of life, and so like, there's some that I've met in the military who were like, wow, okay, like, I'm surprised you've made it this far, but there are plenty of others who are very intelligent and very good at figuring things out. And so it's like that was probably the one thing. It's not so much. I didn't hear very much about like imperialism or racism or any of that when I was in. But that was like I got out like 10 years ago now. So who knows what's changed? Right.
Well, I mean, I think like even you see in the scriptures like that Jesus never condemned a soldier for fighting for their country, and I think some people have kind of a rosy-eyed view of like how we're gonna have like world peace without Jesus and his kingdom established on the earth. So we're gonna, if we, like, I don't know, I think war is actually a good picture of life, because I think whether people want it to or not. I mean, I wish we wouldn't go. I hope we don't go to wars. You don't want to see people die.
No, I agree.
And I think that maybe sometimes like a government could pursue war for a corrupt or evil motive, and soldiers could fight. And I think that biblically even like God would not hold the soldier accountable for like the corruption of his leadership that the soldier is unaware of, the backroom dealings or whatever, right? And that's a whole nother philosophical, theological debate to have just war theory and all that.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes people to me, it's like there's underneath everything there, things could always resort to violence. And to me, like, my theological understanding is like that doesn't go away till Jesus sets up his kingdom on the earth and he judges the living and the dead and creates a new heaven and a new earth and a world free from sin. So until then, yes, let's try to be people of peace. Let's not go in. Hopefully there's not unnecessary wars, but like, people have to protect their borders. They have to protect their people. They have to protect your family, and I think that sadly, I've been in an atmosphere where I've heard a lot of even pastors going towards like full pacifism, and I understand some of the reasons why they might embrace that. But it's like there's almost no room for bravery anymore. Even like bravery is like doing nothing, and I think it does take courage to like turn the other cheek. But Jesus, like, turning the other cheek or going the extra mile or giving someone your coat when they ask for it, like in the Sermon on the Mount, those are all small offenses or small inconveniences. It's not like, if someone threatens to kill your wife and children, then stand down and just say, I forgive you. It was if they strike you on the cheek, then you turn the other cheek. It's like, it's a de-escalation principle to try to avoid a fight, try to avoid a war. But if they're going to like try to end your life, there's no clear teaching in the scripture that you're supposed to just be a doormat and let people abuse you or violate you or your family, and so I think sometimes people say, like, I don't know, I think that we can empower people to be cowards, actually, instead of protecting and standing for something that they believe in. And again, that doesn't mean that bravery means violence. But if someone's going to be violent against you, I think that it's your God-given authority as a father, as a husband, to stand your ground and protect your family.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think as you said, like, I think in America specifically, people have this kind of rose-colored glasses about like what it would mean to be pacifists and not do anything, right? And it's like, I've been to other parts of the world, and if we just didn't do anything, I think we wouldn't like what other people would want to do, and so it's like, I mean, sometimes they say the peace means having the bigger stick, and I don't necessarily agree with that in every context, but I do think that the threat of force and the ability to the realistic threat of force is a way that we can maintain our way of life and our peace and our like be able to do the things that we want to do, right? I mean, there are many people in this world who don't have the same ethical views as the people that would prefer pacifism, right? Yeah. And so, like, well, how do you stop them from like not letting you be pacifist? Right. So there has to be something there. There has to be some reasonable and responsible measure of protection and safety. And people disagree about what's reasonable, I suppose. Right. So.
Yeah, and then like sometimes we're like criticizing, in this instance, criticizing the military or things like that. But then you're also your freedom to criticize has been paid for by somebody else's blood to give you that freedom to criticize, And so it's like sometimes we're eating the fruits of what we're condemning, and so it's like, I think it's important to honor people that sacrifice their lives for our freedoms. And part of the reason I wanted to bring you on is I just want to hear from somebody that's a Christian that, loves God and has been through, obviously served in the military. Because I think there's young men that wonder, like, should I serve? Should I not? Is there would you recommend people go into the service, or it just depends on who they are and how they're wired or what kind of job they go after? It's like person by person.
Yeah, it's funny. I've thought about this in context of like my son, right? It's like he's very young, but obviously like it's not anytime soon. But it's like, would I want him to go in? Like I kind of, if he wanted to, I want him to. But if he doesn't want to, he has no interest in it, then no. Why? Like, why put yourself at that extra risk if you don't feel like you need that? You know. And I think some people really need it. I think some people it's really helpful for. I mean, there's people that I think to some extent it's helped their lives like a lot. People that were in bad situations that turned themselves around because they got that kind of affirmation from better role models, and people that were outside of the environment that they grew up in. We're so much a product of our environment, and if you can change that so dramatically, like you move across the country and you're with a bunch of other guys that have nothing to do with the environment that you grew up in, I think that's a good way to try and reset and get yourself out of a bad situation potentially. I know some people that did. Unfortunately, some people get out and then they go right back to it, and then it's like, well, what did you even do that for? But I mean, like I said, it's a microcosm. It kind of takes all kinds. Like,
Right.
some people it helps, and some people it doesn't.
So were you in combat for part of your service?
Yeah.
Was that hard for you to deal with in the aftermath, like mental health, spiritual health, kind of like how did you? I mean, you seem to me like you're pretty stable and pretty healthy, like mentally, emotionally. Like so. Is there something that you did to process things that helped you navigate?
I think we were pretty fortunate. I think we were in some some firefight scenarios and IED scenarios, but nothing like some stories people may have heard of like close quarters combat, like very like very, very, I guess, mentally destabilizing situations. It was more like, well, we get blown up.
Right.
It's, I think for the most part, like, you worry about the TBI and like potentially having something there that I think can impact your emotions and your psychology to some extent, along with the actual trauma, the emotional trauma. But it was more like frustration. It was more like in any kind of combat like event in Afghanistan or Iraq, we were the superior force, like 9 times out of 10, at least in my experience, because we're going out there, we've well planned our route and what we're doing and our mission, and at best it was a few people shooting at us, taking pot shots, or putting mines to just kind of disrupt the logistics and the supply that we had. So it wasn't like we're getting to like full on like battles out there. Like we would win any kind of skirmish that would occur, but it was more like we would just run over a bomb and like my truck's blown up and my gunner's hurt and like there's nothing I can do about it. It's just frustrating.
Gotcha.
Like, there's nothing to do. So it was not. Like I said, I think we were really fortunate. Like I didn't lose anybody super close to me. People made it through mainly unscathed. So I think just really fortunate, really lucky.
Well, again, I'm thankful for your service and for everybody that serves. It takes a lot of courage and it's a sacrifice. I mean, like you said, you go in and you're told what to do. And it's you're not in control of your life anymore, huh?
No, it's weird. It's funny. It's I tell people the first adult decision I ever made was like to not make any more adult decisions for 5 years, because like you literally like you can almost do nothing. So it's kind of funny.
So you got exposed to grappling in the military. It was the first time. Did you wrestle in high school or anything?
I didn't. No. It's funny. I come from Minnesota, where there's so much good wrestling.
I know you got your Viking shirt on. How about that?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, but I never got into it. I had some friends that wrestled and stuff, but it just wasn't. Like, I think like wrestling and sports like that, it's like if your parents get you into it, like it's a little bit more of a niche sport. Like if your parents like it, then you might do it.
Well, I went to Christian school and we didn't have wrestling, and you can, and I guess I kind of knew about it, but maybe I didn't want it bad enough. But I loved wrestling with my dad and wrestling with friends even a little bit. And I probably had like small guy syndrome because I was like, it always meant more to me than everybody else when we'd wrestle because I was smaller than everybody. So I was like, I'm going to prove that I can win or whatever. And they'd be like, calm down, But I always wished that I had wrestled for some reason. Like, oh man, I wish I would have done that. And so when I heard about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and in my mind, I had never really paid, like I had a few friends that were like just those kind of like martial art, whether it was like a martial art movie junkie or they did like Kung Fu or karate or like, so I had a few people growing up that none of them were like super close, but they were like that guy that was always into that stuff. And so I don't know, I also like growing up in the church saw it as like martial arts as more like, I saw a lot of the spiritual aspect from even other people that did it, and where they were talking about chi and all these different things. And so then actually one of my friends, Chris, who I'll get on this podcast eventually here, he talked to me about it when I was 30 on my 30th birthday, and he's like, I've been training it, because I knew he had done other martial arts, and I was like, what are you doing these days? And he's like, oh, I'm doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I'm like, what's that one like? And so I was like, I just never always thought, man, I've heard some weird stories about like people getting into weird spiritual practices tied to their martial arts. And so he's like, no, it came from Brazil. If anything, they probably had a Catholic background. And he's like, he's like they, and then he's like, and it's just like, it's like wrestling. It's a grappling sport. And I'm like, it is. And then with the internet and like YouTube videos, like somewhere in my 30s, I started seeing jiu-jitsu videos on YouTube, and I was like, man, I was interested when he talked to me, and now I'm like almost 40 because I must have been 38. I'm 41 now. So anyway, yeah, it must have been like, it's like 2.5 years ago. So I was finally like, I reached out to you and to Chris, and you knew the instructor at Chris's academy where he trains too, and I was lived closer to there than the one you were teaching at, so it was like kind of like, where do I go? And so anyway, and I was really sick when I started, overcoming all this weird gut issues, and I lost a lot of weight, and so it was like hard to get through just a single lesson when I first went, but it would like, I think it helped me in my physical recovery, because I was like, but I made it through an hour, and it was like kind of these little mental stepping stones of like improvement. So anyway, I for anybody listening that didn't know, like I started jiu-jitsu 2.5 years ago, so I'm in our school we got a test for blue belt, so I'm a 4-stripe white belt, and they gave us an intermediate belt, like to show that we're done with being the white belt, but we still have to test before we get our blue belt. Nice. Okay. Or whatever. So anyway, so hopefully I'll be testing pretty soon, and nice. And I'll make it through. And we're doing judo too now, because our new instructor is also a black belt in judo, and that's been really fun. So, and my son does it with me, so that's been cool. But anyhow, so just a little context for like my perspective of it all and how I got into it. But it's been really cool as a pastor to have an outlet that's physical and it's like super mental, because it's amazing to me how much it gives me a mental break from other stresses. Like even during the day, randomly, I'm just thinking about, why did I lose the last time we sparred? What should I have done differently? Maybe I should look something up. And I'm like, man, I'm thinking about this a lot. Like how it, like they say, it's like human chess kind of. So you got to keep thinking about your next move or what you could have done. Or
Right.
Right. So anyway, so you got into it in the military, and was it, that guy was in jiu-jitsu then that started grappling with you?
Yeah. So there was one guy, my friend Justin, who was a blue belt, and then I actually had another friend who was a purple belt, and so those were like, I mean, this was like 12 years ago. So purple belts in the wild were much more rare than they are like now. Now there's purple belts everywhere. But he was like the highest belt I knew in the military, and so like we would roll a little bit when we could. They had some mats out there that because in the Marine Corps they do something called McMap. There's Marine Corps martial arts program, and there is some jiu-jitsu in McMap. There's some mount techniques, some like guard things, some arm bars and stuff from guard, but it's like, it's not very good. It's not very technical. It's like an amalgamation of multiple different martial arts, and so because of that, I think it loses some of the pop from each of them to some extent, and specifically like partly it is the amount of training you get. You just don't have to spend enough hours training to be really good at what you're doing. Like you've been training 2.5 years. Like you don't realize like, oh, someone's been training like 3 years more than me and they train 2 or 3 days a week. Like they are miles ahead of me. Right. And of what they're capable of doing. Yeah. And so if you're not spending all those hours doing it, you're not really that good. So McMap is not like a very like super like well thought out great martial art. So like I would try and execute the techniques I knew with my friends, and they were like, they'd actually trained like in a jiu-jitsu gym with jiu-jitsu people, and it's like they were just like much better. All their technique was much more polished, and it's like, oh, this is pretty crazy. Like how much, even training just a little bit with them, I was much better than a lot of the other Marines that I would train with. And so you're like, oh wow, there's really something to this. So yeah, when I got out, I was like, moving to a new place, didn't have any like network, no social network at all, and I'm like, okay, well I could try and do something, right? So like, I was like, well, jiu-jitsu, I liked doing that, so let me find like a jiu-jitsu club. I just looked up a jiu-jitsu gym in Edmonds, and like there it was. I went in there, and it's so funny. The gym had started less than a year ago. It's Kindred BJJ now. It was called Edmonds Jiu-Jitsu at the time, and it was like, just in this little shopping mall area, the mats weren't even like nailed down. They're just like moving around as people are rolling. But I went in there and I rolled, and like it was a great time. I got beat up by another former Marine who just happened to be there when I showed up. He's a black belt at the gym now, Kyle, and like we're still there. Just crazy because so many people leave in jiu-jitsu, but it's funny the people that stick around. It sticks with you. But we rolled, and he beat me pretty bad, and I was in pretty good shape. I was working out. I thought I know a little bit of grappling. I'll be all right. And just got beaten up, and I'm like, all right, I got to keep doing this. Try and get there. And so I've been doing it ever since. So.
So you started out here in Seattle area, like
like that was my first real jiu-jitsu gym. Yeah.
So did you stay pretty consistent all through these 10 years? Like,
Well, I think I'm less consistent now.
Right.
I think when I first started, I was like, like I said, I was young. I was like 23.
Yeah.
In pretty good shape.
And now you have young kids.
Right.
And new career, and like it's a lot.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's tough to juggle it and still get in there multiple times a week. But I trained like 4 or 5 times a week when I first started, like all the time. And I was in college, and I had like, no job or
I probably average twice
job.
a week right now, and I can sometimes hit 3. But I think it's actually gotten easier as my kids have gotten a little older. Like if they were younger, that's probably why I wasn't even able to start. It was like I can't even get air, you know. And now, I mean, and actually, my wife and all the girls did it for a while, but during COVID, the girls kind of lost interest.
Sure.
Grace is super busy, but she really liked the self-defense aspect as a woman, and hopefully she'll get back in there in the right timing. But homeschool's pretty intense right now, and she's doing great with it. But Justice, my boy, he just like during COVID, it like for whatever reason, it motivated him even more to want to do it. And so now he's like, he loves it. I mean, like I'm not pushing him or trying to encourage him to go so much as like he wants to train. He wants to try stuff at home, you know.
Oh, that's good.
So it's pretty fun to have that, you know, father-son connection. Do you feel like there's a similarity in a sense of like doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and being in a martial art that has like a hierarchy and being in the military? Like in a sense, is there some overlap there?
Oh, that's interesting. I guess to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's funny. Like what is it? Like the belt doesn't necessarily mean that much, right? Like it's more about like that you're getting your due respect for like the amount of time you've put in or the effort or your skill level to some extent, and the belt means different things for different people, and so like it's not necessarily like a strict hierarchy, but there is a certain amount of respect that is expected in that kind of a traditional like martial art culture where it's like, oh, this person's a higher belt than you. You should kind of defer to them and like listen to them when they tell you something. And but it's not as hard and strong as the military, where it was like they could literally tell you to do something.
And it doesn't mean that the higher belt is necessarily going to win every time or anything like that. But
although some people think they should.
Yeah,
but I think that's bad. But
well, like one of the guys that came in, he did quite a bit of wrestling. So I mean, he's got hundreds and hundreds of hours on the mat, and so he flew through white belt faster than anybody that I've been with this whole time, and he's better than a lot of people. But it's like, well, that's because he wrestled for so many years, so he just picked stuff up. He had all that time on, he has all that life experience. All that training experience, and it shows, you know. So like it makes sense, even though he might be a lower rank or less time, he technically doesn't have less time when you count.
Well, I mean, part of it is like there's like hobbyist jiu-jitsu people versus like professional, like, you know, borderline professional, and like the professional jiu-jitsu black belt that competes, like, and you started jiu-jitsu in your like 40s or 50s, you'll never, even if you get a black belt one day, you'll never be that level.
You're
so there is a gradation in the belts. Like it's not like black belt is this, and if you don't meet this, you're not going to get it. It's not quite like that. Like there's like a gray area and, you know, room for interpretation. And like you said, like your gym, you do like testing stuff. We don't do testing at all.
A lot of them don't.
Ours is a lot more like we know the people, and we decide when we think that they're ready based on some loose requirements and like loose kind of understanding of what their skill level is, and also the amount of time they've been there, and like how like what part of like the gym culture they are, and like if they're a positive influence in the gym culture or if they're not, because they're I mean, jiu-jitsu I think it's a great outlet for people, and I think it's helped. I've seen it help and change a lot of people's lives too. But it also tends to attract people that are a little interesting, and you know, that's a good thing. I think it's great to be able to have like we have police officers and like crazy, like, you know, ex-convicts and stuff, and not necessarily crazy, but, you know, ex-convicts or other people with other crazy different walks of life
for sure, that
all get together and we just roll and have fun and talk and whatever. But because of that, the interesting, you know, group of people that it attracts, there are some people that are like, I mean, I'll roll with him, but I don't know if I'd let him watch my child, right? Like it's just kind of like you have an interesting group. So I don't know where I was going with that.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I think even with ours, we're affiliated with Pedro Sauer Association. I think there is a certain like attitude and level. I think even as you get to the upper belts, like I think you still test for like proficiency in certain things, but I think they won't even let you test on the upper belts until like they know that you have, you know, you experientially can perform at a certain level.
I think it like as it goes to higher levels, there's a little bit more like reputation attached to it. It's like, oh, that's one of my black belts. Like, it's like he can't be one of my black belts unless he represents like someone that I wouldn't mind the world knowing that represents me, you know?
Yeah,
like
that I gave it to him.
Exactly. It's like, oh, who gave this guy his black belt? This jerk? Like, what, you know, and then it's like, oh, it's me. Oh, embarrassing, you know?
Right.
And there are people that have done that and been embarrassed by students, and like, so there's people that are very strict about whether or not they would give a black belt to someone based on character issues. Yeah. And I think that's good. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's fair. Yeah. Like, you don't necessarily, like, part of the martial art and like the teaching is hopefully they're taking some of the skills and the mindsets and like the ego like breaking, and they're applying it off the mat as well as on. Yeah.
We'll see. Like for me, one of the benefits of it is I feel like, and you know, I'm working at church. I'm a pastor, so you don't really see this. People won't see this side of me because you're just not in that environment to see how competitive I am. You know, and so there were certain things I just gave up on earlier in life because I wasn't somewhat naturally good at them. There's other things that I stuck with because I was good at them, you know, and I hated failure. And so, I mean, you talked about it, I think earlier when we were talking here about failure in the military. They have this standard and you just fail. And like, there's been a couple times I thought of quitting jiu-jitsu because I would just leave so frustrated at a certain moment. Like, how can I not get that? How could I just fail? And, or like when people would give me constructive, because, you probably heard the phrase, like, the mat doesn't lie, you know? Yeah. It's like, if I knew how to do it, I would have done it. And there was a reason it wasn't working. It's because I was doing it wrong. Yeah. And so it's like sometimes that feedback, it's been good for me because I've had to realize feedback and it is constructive criticism. And our coaches are really encouraging and kind guy. Like, they're really, you know, affirming kind of guys. They're not there to like tear you down, but like to be a good teacher, they need to point out what you're doing wrong. And obviously you are doing something wrong again, because it's not working. Yeah. So, but it was just, I'd find myself, and you know, I wouldn't like be disrespectful or yell or anything like there, or necessarily show my frustration, but I would just sit there and be like, I'm so frustrated that they keep telling me I'm doing it wrong. You know what I mean? And I'm like, but I need to know that I'm doing it wrong. Yeah. So anyway, it's been good for like that whole concept of learning through failure. And you have to. That's why, to me, it's like the more you do it and you see somebody has getting to their upper belts, it's like, that's a lot of respect because they failed a lot of times. Yeah.
Well, I think that's something where like you can take that off the mat, right? It's just like, everyone's bad. Yeah. When they start jiu-jitsu, everybody, even like the best people in the world, when they started, they were not good. Right. Like they just weren't born like, oh, I'm awesome at this. Like, you know, some people, like you said, have like wrestling or other backgrounds, whatnot, and that can give them an advantage. But they weren't good at wrestling when they started wrestling, right? Like, you have to like do this through, you know, repetition over and over and over again, and try and learn from your mistakes. And the great thing about it is that it gives you really practical feedback. It's like, well, if you're doing something wrong, you get choked, or you get your arm, you know, hyperextended, or whatever. You're like, oh, okay, I can't do that anymore. Yep. And there's no faking it. There's no like, I think I was doing that right, but it was just a fluke. Like, no, it keeps happening. It's because you're doing it wrong. Like, you need to change something. And so it's like much more in your face. Whereas I think a lot of aspects of life, when you're doing something wrong, you can kind of get away with it. And there's not such a in your face, like you're doing it wrong kind of realization. Where in jiu-jitsu, it's like, if you're doing it wrong, like you'll find out about it, you know, when you roll with people that are like better than you. Like, sometimes you can get away with things with people that are worse than you, and then you try that with someone that's better, and it's like, oh no, that wasn't good. Like, I'm not doing this right. And so like there's a good check to like see how well you've progressed.
Totally. I remember hearing Pedro Sowers he did an interview, and he was talking about like how he got into jiu-jitsu and the Gracie families. He was friends with Hickson, and he brought him in, and he's like, when I first started training, he goes for like, I think he said the first 2 years he tapped 50 times every session. And he's like, but my training partners were Helio and Hickson. And he's like, so once I only was getting tapped like 20 times a night, he goes, I was like feeling like, man, I'm really getting better. Yeah. And so it was so encouraging to hear, like, you know, someone who's considered like, you know, one of the best teachers and so renowned, right? Like, he had to go through the same failure process as everybody else, and maybe even a little more so because of who his training partners were. Yeah. But I think that's a really valuable thing for young men to stick to a discipline and put themselves in an environment where they get trained mentally, physically, and like can develop themselves, because, you know, there's there's a book I referred to a little bit when I started this podcast called The Boy Crisis. And I mean, I think that even the author of The Boy Crisis, he's not a Christian, but he recommends that young men find church. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It's like probably the best place in a community where older men can affirm younger men and like be there for each other. But I think a martial art could be hugely beneficial. And I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because it's so technical, you know, and it like gives the mental aspect, and it's, you know, we're never talking about some spiritual stuff in that sense. I mean, for some people it probably is like their religion, you know, because that's what they have, and they, like you said, they might have turned their life around through the discipline and through meeting guys and like building friendships and having a more positive outlet with their time. So some people will treat it like any sport; they could treat it like a religion. But I like that it's just more, you know, physical, technical, leverage, technique, working with the human anatomy. So it's like really, I enjoy a lot of the mental kind of aspects.
I think kind of to go along a little bit with what you said is that it's like it's an outlet. It's a competitive outlet for grown men, like, and I mean grown women as well. I mean, there are considerably less women that do jiu-jitsu in my experience, and there's probably various reasons for that. But a large portion of people is young men that get into it, and I think that's kind of missing in society today. That like you get out of high school, and I had multiple friends that were like wrestled in high school or did other things, and like most people aren't going to college for sports to compete. Right. You know, most human beings in America just aren't that talented. And then even then, maybe you do a couple of years of that, and then you're done. You have no more competitive. You know, some people will do pick up baseball leagues or play basketball at the park or do things like that to try and get your competitive like outlet. But I think jiu-jitsu is such a good physical like competitive place to like really test yourself and like exert some you know aggression and violence in like a controlled and safe way that I don't know that exists in many places outside of it. And you know, we talked about the, you know, Wild at Heart or not, whatnot, and it's like you know, they talk about like God is violent, like God is aggressive. Like there are aspects of God that are kind and nurturing and loving, but there are other aspects that are violent and aggressive, and like I think that in my experience, like many of the men I've known and myself, like you have a violence and aggression in you that you need to get out in some way. And I think that there aren't a lot of good outlets for that once you reach adulthood as a man. I think jiu-jitsu is a great outlet for it. Like I can safely like simulate murder on my friend, and we'll hang out and laugh afterwards and talk about it and go, you know, and you know, act like nothing happened. But it is like you're getting that out. Like, oh, okay, I'm trying to get better at this thing, and there is some practicality to it. But I think it's also just like we have this in us, and we want to get it out in some way.
Absolutely. And for people that are listening, and you're like, I don't really know anything about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or grappling, like in the sport side of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like there's no striking, you know, so you're not punching and kicking each other. So, I mean, obviously people can get injured in anything physical, but the whole tap out, did that start with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Or they like kind of the first sport that officially did tap out?
Oh, actually, that's a good question. I'm not sure where the concept of tapping
I tried
out
to look it up a little bit, but I felt like, because now it's like a cultural like phrase, like people will say, man, work was so stressful, I just had to tap out and like, you know, go home, like go walk on the beach, or I just, you know, it's become like a cultural phrase. But it started, I think, in some form of grappling or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I had looked it up a little, and I can't remember
it might be like early UFC or something too. I know, because Jiu-Jitsu kind of dominated early UFC. But yeah, like it is like the concept of being able to quit and no more harm come to you, right? Like that's very, very useful. You know, there are some striking martial arts, and like I don't, you know, I like striking martial arts. They're interesting to watch and they're entertaining, and they're probably much more entertaining than grappling for most people. But like repetitive like strikes of the head and other parts of the body are pretty bad for you over the long term. I think it's hard to argue that they're not. And jiu-jitsu, fortunately, you don't really get that. You don't get, you know, like hit in the head very often. I mean, on occasion I'll take a knee or a foot to the face by accident. But for the most part, I'm not dealing with that. The worst thing is that not the only way, but the main way you're going to get injured is if you don't allow yourself to tap and you get too wrapped up in your own ego, like, I'm not going to give up. And it's like, well, you should give up. Like, you got to learn when to quit. And that's part of the lessons, I think, of the sport, too, is like, there's a time when you just have to stop. Like, it's like, oh, I can't do this anymore. Like, this is going to cause, you know, damage to me, and it's not worth my pride to try and survive this anymore. Yeah.
And it is like when I was first starting, like you realize when you're sparring and like somebody's got you in a choke and you tap out, you realize like on the street, they just put me to sleep, or, you know, if they held me long enough, they could kill me.
Yeah.
So it has that like that aggression, brutality, like victory, competitive thing.
Yeah.
But then it also, because of the tap out, it's just like, then you just start over and
Yeah.
everybody lets go and everybody's friends. But it gives you that ability to train more, not that you're always, you know, going at 100% of your physical ability and energy level, like that you're pushing it, right? But it gives you that ability to like actually train what you would do in a real situation, but then get out of it before you go to sleep or get somebody to break one of your joints or whatever.
The stakes aren't that high, but what you're simulating, the stakes are as high as possible. Really, right. Like,
right.
Like,
yeah, that's a good
like,
way to say it.
Yeah. If they choked me unconscious, they could do anything they wanted to me. Like,
Right.
in like a violent altercation out in the street or doing something, you know, like, so you have that in the back of your mind when it happens. You're like, oh, I can't, that's not acceptable. Like, I need to try and get better so that wouldn't happen. But it's still like that you're okay. Like you're safe afterwards, and there's no, you know, nothing bad's gonna happen to you. And I think that's like a great part of like having a good gym culture, is that people are very respectful. And I tell my students, like, if someone taps, it doesn't matter if you think you don't have anything, or you're like, oh, why are they tapping? You stop.
Yeah.
Like, we stop, we get up, we make sure everybody's okay, and then we go again.
Right.
And that's why you get to repeat over and over again. You can do multiple matches with someone, because like, oh darn, I got into a bad situation and I had to give up. Let's start again. Yeah. Like from scratch, and it's good for both of us, because now that person can work through the techniques and get back into a submitting position, or maybe you can do something a little bit more successful instead of like trying to fight from near like the end, you know. So it's good to be able to do that.
Yeah. How has it benefited you, like overall, like even like off the mat? What would you say some of your big takeaways for doing it for 10 years now and being a black belt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think it's a little bit of a carryover from military experience, like just level of confidence, like feeling comfortable. Like I said, I think young men, and I think I was no exception to this, like, you want to fight people, right? Like, you have this level of aggression and violence that you like want to put out there. Yeah. And I think when you do it so regularly, when you're grappling people so often, and you kind of know that sometimes people don't look like they're that dangerous, and they actually could be. Like, you don't know what this person's capable of. It kind of changes your mindset a little bit. It's not worth it. Like, or even like, even if I was to win this fight, like, what's it going to cost me? Like, how much am I going to get injured from this? You know, and it's just like, it changes your mindset a little bit about like how you interact with other people, like in normal everyday life. Right. And we talked about like that. I think people in America are a little rose-colored glasses about like what could happen, and because people don't. Hopefully, like, you're living in a place where you're not under threat of like assault all the time, but like, it could happen. Like, people can turn on a dime and injure you like gravely, like, and it's not that hard to do, unfortunately. And you learn that in martial arts, that it's actually not that hard to really hurt someone. I think
I've heard other guys say, in a sense, it does make you want to not have to fight, because you're like, you never know. Like you said, what does that other person know? Do they get a lucky shot in? Do they have a weapon? They could be more trained than you realize. And then when you, like, you know, if somebody, I don't know, it seems like maybe a small issue, it really seems small to you. Like, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, or if somebody's being like a little rude or whatever, then it's kind of like, well, somebody just, you know, choked me out and I was fighting for my life a few minutes ago, and like, okay, this is like a little irritation. This isn't worth my time. Right.
It changes your perspective. Just a little bit cooler and calmer about minor things. Hopefully. Hopefully I am. I like to think I am. But,
I think too, like, it's I don't remember somebody was saying that they believe that Brazilian Jiu Jitsu really helped people for other sports or athletic performance, because it gave you a lot of body awareness. And I realized, like, in my short time of and one of those years was COVID, so it's, you know, didn't really get to train that much for almost a year. But it is funny how, like, all of a sudden it's hard, because, like, mentally when you're on the floor and somebody's like got your neck, and then you could easily do something with your feet and you could bridge or whatever, but you're so focused on one spot, and then all of a sudden, the more you do it, now I can focus on what's happening to my neck, my hands, my feet, and I have way more body awareness or spatial awareness. And I was like, oh, maybe that could help, like, people in other athletic endeavors, like, just know like where to put their body, or like,
I think it's like it's similar to I'd say like gymnastics and wrestling and things like that, where like there's actually a word for this and I can't remember it, but it's knowing where your body is in space.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And like having an awareness of where you are in space. Like gymnasts have that because like flying through the air.
Yeah.
Like they have to have a complete awareness of where they are, and they have to be able to like invert and be upside down and still have that good like understanding. And the same thing is true, I think, in grappling, where you're like just on the ground and there's only one other person there. That's the only frame of reference is the ground, and being able to know where all parts of your body are and trying to get them into the right position to do what you're trying to do. So I think you're right. I think that there is some good, and also like I think there's a lot of agility and like other muscles you're working out when you're doing jiu-jitsu that you might not do in other sports. I know I've seen like Seahawks have done jiu-jitsu at different gyms in the area and stuff. People take pictures and put them online. It's like because it's a little cross training. It's just something a little different.
Well, I've tried to like. I'm always thinking like through a pastoral, like theological lens or whatever, like, is there a mandate for us to learn self-defense or martial arts, and it's like, even like one of my close mentors is like Bishop Joseph Matera. He'll be here next week. I mean, it won't be next week by the time people listen to this, but he's a lifetime martial artist, and he actually is, he's mentoring another young pastor in the New York area that's like an IBJFF like world champion like jiu-jitsu guy. So he's like, and so he like teaches him like ministry and leadership and pastoring a church, and then this guy teaches him jiu-jitsu stuff. And so anyway, because he's like, I don't know if I want to try jiu-jitsu, because he's done a lot of other things, and he's like, I'm getting older and I don't know if I have time to like train. But I guess a gym just literally opened around the corner from his house, so he's starting to like train there a little bit. And then because this guy he mentors is a little further distance in New York because the city's so big, it's not like they can just like roll up every day and say hi or whatever. But he's been a lifetime martial artist, and so we talk about different things related to what we're training or what we're learning, and so that's kind of fun. But I've tried to think like, there's certainly not a biblical mandate to know how to like physically, but I mean, I think Christians have a really low view of the body, and it's not like one Bible verse you can point to, but there is teachings. If you look at the worldview of the Bible, that like God does care about like the development of the body or even the health of the body. And I think that because ultimately jiu-jitsu is not going to save your soul and like help you deal with life after death and your sin being forgiven and atone for your unrighteousness. So Christians, I think, get very dualistic and think of like only spiritual things are important, and then we neglect our physical development or our physical health. So I think a lot of guys like that just and there's nothing wrong with video games or like certain like leisure activities to a certain point, right? But like I think jiu-jitsu would be good for guys to check out because it like helps you physically develop, and physical development will not necessarily lead to spiritual development, but there's a lot of crossover when you learn and you take care of your body. You learn, it does train you in self-control, in a certain sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Self-discipline is definitely a biblical value, and so there are a lot of values it reinforces, and I think it would help guys be more successful, like you, or more confident, like you were saying, and it could lead to success because, you've maybe rolled with like people that are either really, and like you said, like jiu-jitsu seems to take like professional people, police officers, like leaders, or like people that are financially well off that want to do it as like a hobby, like I want to learn something cool and I've got a lot of money and time. And then you got people that are like maybe have a criminal record and they're really broken and they're trying to find a positive outlet for their life. So it's kind of similar to what a church is like, where you get really successful people that are solid and then people that are really broken, you put them all in the same kind of environment. So I've brought a few guys in for like free trials and stuff like that, and got some others that are interested, because I think it's really important to develop yourself as a whole person. And even in the Bible times, like there was a lot of, everything was probably more physical. Like obviously you're walking everywhere, and there's a lot more like either like trades or farming or fishing, or it's an agrarian culture. So, and now so many of our jobs are like automated, sitting at a desk, talking to people, punching a computer. So I think that we actually have higher levels of anxiety. And that's the other thing about jiu-jitsu. It's like sometimes I'm kind of like anxious or stressed out 'cause for whatever reason. I'm like, you feel, I think especially, I can still feel that, not all the time, but like when I get into a new group that's like more advanced and now I'm at the bottom of the the rung again, and I'm like, I'm gonna go get beat up for an hour, and like I don't know if I really want to do this. Like, man, that one guy was kind of smashing hard last time, and I don't really feel like it today. So like, but there's something about when you present yourself, you intentionally go into dangerous situations and continue to train in them, it actually lowers your anxiety level in other areas. Yeah. And it, like through all the health crisis I went through, it's kind of like the effect of like what you learn about saunas, like infrared sauna or a sauna is like you go stress your body out with raising the heat, and then it actually helps your body be lower stressed the rest of the time normally. And so it's kind of this weird, sense. Like you put yourself in the fire. And it purifies you, it refines you a little bit.
I think that's generally true. Right? Yeah, the same thing with exercise or lifting weights. Your bones get stronger when you lift weights. Your muscles tear and get stronger when they rebuild, right? Things like that. And it's interesting you said that about the physical, neglecting the physical. I mean, I think like fasting is a really important part of the Christian life, and fasting is a physical discipline, right? And like obviously, grappling is not the same as fasting, right? But it is, you're physically disciplining yourself in some way, and I think that is important to have mastery and control over your body, right? We're supposed to take care of our bodies, and like they're given to us, and they're important. They're temples to God, and like he's talked about multiple times that how to treat your body well, and so to have discipline over that is, I think, important. And that's not just working out, and there's other aspects to that, of course.
Totally.
But I think that's part of it. So I think it's important.
There's definitely other ways. Yeah, like you said, you don't have to do martial arts or jiu-jitsu or whatever, but there are other ways that I think is really important that we stay more active. And I wonder sometimes you shouldn't ever make theological statements like from silence, right? But sometimes I wonder, like, if the Bible was written like in a different time, would it have addressed people walked all the time and they didn't eat poisoned food, and
sure, would a letter from Paul have been a little bit more
would have been a little more
about working out?
I don't know. And he does talk about bodily exercise profits a little. So it says it is profit. Like, godliness with contentment is great gain. So like the development of your soul, of your spiritual life is the most important thing, I believe, for sure. But the guy that coached me through all my health crisis, Dr. Fred Bishey, like he grieves over like how Christians will be the first ones to tune him out, and he has more influence in the New Age community, and they'll like they'll hang on every word he says, and like, oh, Freddie, you're the and he's a Christian man, but he's like, man, I can't go to churches, and they just like kind of blow me off sometimes, or people think I'm overly zealous about food, or but he's like, why don't people want to like take care of their body? Don't you think it's good? And I'm like, yeah, until I went through a health crisis, I wasn't really taking care of my body. I was trying to exercise and be physically active, but I wasn't eating anywhere remotely good. Did a little fasting, but fasting is another really important part of spiritual development that, of course, is obviously physical benefits and physical challenge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as well. So, like, do you have any recommendations for, like, if guys are interested in starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something, like how they would find a good, or gals even maybe, but like mostly young men are going to listen to this, or men, like how would you kind of spot like what you would perceive to be a good school? Or
that's a great question. I hear all these forums that talk about this all the time. But I mean, I think the biggest thing is like proximity, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like when you're working out, like anything that gives you less excuses to do it is better, right? So, like, there might be a better gym like across town, but if you're not going to drive there multiple times a week, then go to a gym closer to you. And I think they all have something different to offer, and they all have their own culture and their own kind of way that they do things, and that's I think a good thing. I think that makes it a little bit more fun and interesting and cool to drop in different places. But like I would look for. I think the danger with jiu-jitsu or anything that, as you mentioned earlier, people can make it into kind of a religion of their own. Is like cult of personality things that have happened in the jiu-jitsu community in the past, where people have taken advantage of this position of perceived authority. That there is some authority there as the as a professor, but you're also a business owner who's offering a service. And people tend to lend more authority to that than maybe they should in some cases, and you've seen people take advantage of that, unfortunately. And so kind of just being aware of that. Like
Yeah.
if people are being a little bit weird and have expectations that you think are
Yeah.
not reasonable from someone that you're just going to do a workout with,
Yeah.
or just trying to like learn a discipline from,
Uh-huh.
that like they don't necessarily have to be your like spiritual or emotional mentor,
Yeah.
to be your jiu-jitsu coach, you know.
That's
and
good
I think
advice.
that's an important thing to kind of think about when you're doing it. I mean, some people are really good at that, and I've met some people in jiu-jitsu that I are like people that I go to, you know, for life advice and things.
Yeah.
But that just because they have a black belt on doesn't mean that they're qualified to give you life advice.
Yeah.
I would just say that.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they do, and like I said, like we talked about, I think there's lessons to be learned off the mat from on the mat, but not everybody applies to them. So
Right.
kind of keep that in mind. So yeah, if you,
Yeah.
I would keep that in mind as you're going and visiting gyms. Like, does it feel weird?
Yeah.
Is it like too much respect given to this coach, and does it like feel like awkward to you? I'm probably like overselling the warning. I haven't been to any gyms personally that's felt like
Right.
that.
I've heard some
necessarily,
stories. Yeah, thankfully I've been around really positive people that don't, you know, like blur that line, don't get weird, because it's like a lot of it's self-discovery, right? Like letting people discover their life lessons
Right.
through their experience or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great part of jiu-jitsu, right? Like we teach a certain amount, and then you kind of have to learn on your own,
Yeah.
right? And that's how you develop your own game and your own skill set, is because you've learned from mistakes in maybe a little bit different way than I did. And that's a good thing. It gives you kind of a unique perspective. So, but yeah, like, I think like any gym that you can get to is probably good, hopefully.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, the culture, I think you can kind of feel the culture of like the instructors or the way people act. Like you said, you could see how some could get a little weird.
Yeah.
But if they're just like a respectful person and they're focused on the technique and helping you learn jiu-jitsu better without trying to like micromanage your life or
Right.
tell you, you know, like some people, they just start spouting off life advice and you're like, no, I'm not really giving you permission.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
to be this for me.
It's funny because it's like, I think there's like some interesting like cultural differences, right? In Japan, like a teacher of martial art is considered like very, very high like honor and respect, and in Brazil they call him professor because it like basically means teacher, right?
Yeah.
But it's like they're not like PhDs or people that are like super like necessarily like really knowledgeable about other areas of life, and so it's like it is interesting trying to like seeing the difference in the culture between Japanese martial arts, Brazilian martial arts, and American. Like the American version is like you don't necessarily have to have all the same like, you know, like cultural, you know, like aspects that a gym in Japan might have, you know. And so I think that's a good thing, right? Because it's the spice of life and variety of different experiences people can have.
Right.
But
do you run into a lot of Christians in the jiu-jitsu world, or like?
Yeah, I've run into some. I mean, I think. I mean, I'm not sure how true this is, but as part of my experience, I don't know if like the Washington area is like super Christian,
right?
Like compared to other parts of the country I've lived in.
Right.
It doesn't seem, or not as like professing Christian, like self-professing Christian. I mean, a lot of people will say like, "Oh, I believe in God," and I like pray to God and I talk to God or something, but they're not like practicing Christian.
We are definitely more on the like, if you look like what the most churched areas, we're definitely on the lower end of the scale, you know, as it stands right now, as I understand it. Yeah.
But I mean, there are some that I've people that I've met through that are definitely strong Christian believers. And stuff, so.
Right. It seems like, I don't know if there's a lot percentage wise, but it just seems like even with like UFC or some mixed martial arts, like there's enough Christian personalities that you end up, you know, like when guys become a professional athlete, like you hear them refer to God and their faith and things like that. So it's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's dominated by Christians necessarily, but it seems like there's a good presence even in like the sport aspect.
Yeah, I mean that's probably true. Actually, I suppose thinking of it that way.
Yeah.
I know, you know, there are people that profess to be Christians or like do the you know the cross, and they're like, are you really living? Like,
Are you living it out?
I mean, you know, far be it from me to judge anyone's life, and everybody's got their own struggles and things they're going through, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But there are definitely quite a few like professional athletes that are, Christians.
Yeah, right on. Well, oh man, this has been great. I really appreciate your time, and it's good to hear your heart and some of your story from military service, what you've learned through jiu-jitsu training and teaching, instructing now. A professor. Do they call you professor? Or?
Some people do.
Yeah,
it's
really?
funny. I don't require it. I know some people like require people call them that. I'm like, that's a little
Okay.
interesting. But you know, people still call me coach. Or,
Ours has probably been more instructor, I think is the term that we've typically used.
Yeah.
But yeah, professor kind of sounds a little more official, or
It does.
like a little like an edge above, even though they could probably be used interchangeably in some ways. But yeah, no, that's cool. Well, I hope that this will make a positive impact on some guys that check this out, and I really appreciate your heart, and it's good to see strong Christian men loving their wives, their kids, serving in the community, teaching at a martial art gym, working in their career. And I think sometimes that I think obviously our spiritual development should be more than our career or like a sport or something like that. But sometimes, especially in like a church like ours, it's a little more Pentecostal charismatic. We can equate spirituality to outward things like somebody lifting their hands in worship or jumping up and down with music or being really like charismatic visibly, and those can have really important and healthy aspects of our spiritual life, like our worship, our closeness to God, experiencing His presence. Like that's all important to me. It's important for men to develop, like a real relationship with God. But I think sometimes we look down on, or we falsely equated that that's like the only spiritual thing. But it's like, no, when somebody like gives their life to training others and keeping their marriage vows and working hard in their career, like these are really godly things. Like this is amazing. Like if you get a man that if a woman lands a man that's like going to stick with his vows and take his family to church and be a person of integrity and try to grow in their relationship with God, like maybe they don't always seem as demonstrative in like certain worship services or whatever, but that does not mean they're less spiritual in any way. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Strive to be someone of a quiet consistency.
Yeah.
Right. Just do your stuff, and hopefully, it'll work. It'll people will notice like for the work and not necessarily for the outward display. And I think that's that's well put. Like there are a lot of people that kind of just put nose to the grindstone and just do what they have to do and like act with integrity and try and do as much as they can to help others. And I think that's really great too, and there's a lot of them that I've met in doing martial arts and stuff, like just humble.
Yeah, that's good. Well, hopefully one of these days I'll get schooled by you. I'll get some time on the mat.
We'll have to roll,
Huh?
We'll have to roll sometime.
Just have to roll, yeah. So I would appreciate that. I'm sure I would learn a ton through failure. But no, I really appreciate your time and your heart, and thanks for checking this out. If it's helpful to you, encouraging, please like the podcast, share it with some friends, help me spread the word, and we'll hopefully you'll be able to check out another episode soon.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
That's it.
Good stuff.
Thanks for joining the John Hammer Show. Please give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you're enjoying the content here. And the best way to support this podcast is leaving us a great review. Thanks.